Hello, everybody. We're here today at Slangwood Studio. It's a beautiful first week of June, and I'm here with the awesome, talented Silvia, Juliana, Mantilla, Ortiz. That's a mouthful of a name, but I wanted to say it for a mouthful of a girl, but that wouldn't sound right. Sounded right. But we're here to talk about other mouthfuls of things because part of your project that you did for your thesis show was a mouthful of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I want to ask you a couple questions. You've been now here in Los Angeles for the past 2 years. What was your experience like here in LA?
My experience in LA, I mean, I have really fallen in love with LA. I think I'm really, really going to miss LA. I had a lot of kind of imagined versions of LA before I came. I think, seeing a lot of the work of Chicano artists and contemporary artists in undergrad really made me excited about LA before coming. But then coming here and just developing a whole network of knowing a bunch of people who are doing really exciting things and seeing kind of the thing about LA I love is just all the different kind of worlds that are in these different neighborhoods and kind of having the opportunity to experience a lot of those neighborhoods and kind of the cultures in there was just, it's been such a rich experience. I feel like the past 2 years have just been a constant like experience after experience after experience.
Yeah, well, you brought up your undergraduate experience, and that's where I met you. I actually met you in Massachusetts when I was doing a teaching residency at Williams College, and you're an undergrad there. But you had a very particular case there because you have a very interesting professor that is a kind of specialist in Chicano art. And can you tell us a little about your experience at Williams and him?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to work as a research assistant for Andin Chaboya after he had been my professor, and I took this Chicano film and video class with him, and kind of through him and through that class started really getting acquainted with like the work of artists like Asco and just a bunch of other kind of film and video that really dealt kind of with the culture of California. And that was kind of my first introduction. And then after that, over the summer, I was working as his research assistant, and he was doing research on for an anthology on writings on Chicano art. And then through that, I got kind of an introduction to just a whole other set of work. But and also through kind of conversations with him about what it had been like to grow up in LA and kind of the way that the things he would tell me about all the artists we were looking at, it just, there was this kind of mythical, amazing world of LA that then really made me want to come over here.
Yeah, but you also come from like a kind of mythical world. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, right? You're originally from Colombia.
Yeah.
And then you grew up in, like Jersey?
Yeah, New Jersey.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
And your parents are both very interesting. What's that kind of mythical world about?
Well, so I grew up in Bogota, Colombia, and I think Bogota is also kind of an amazing city. It's nestled right in the Andes, and so it's kind of this meseta. What's that called? Like a plateau.
Mesa plateau, yeah.
Yeah, where it's just like, but everywhere around it is mountains, and even that plateau is like 2,600 meters above sea level. So it's kind of And in general, Colombia, because of the geography it had with the Andes dividing into 3 mountain ranges once it got to Colombia, there's really regional identities and kind of very different cultures. So it's a very rich place. And then kind of aside from that, all the summers I would spend at my grandmother's house, which was in Santander. And that was kind of a warmer climate, and there was a tiny colonial town, cobblestones, and she would set up kind of like a studio for me in the balcony and let me use her typewriter. And I think like for me that's where I really started kind of working out. I always did art, but I feel like having that space was always like really special for me. And so when I think about Colombia, a lot of times I think kind of about those really kind of free magical summers that I had, and then Bogota, which was much more kind of buttoned down, kind of strict city
official.
In a way. Yeah. And that's actually sometimes when I think about my experience in the US now, like the East Coast sometimes feels a lot more like Bogota, and then Los Angeles feels a lot more like Giron.
Yeah, of course. The West Coast is the best coast. So you went from there to a real to the city in New Jersey or
Well,
New York?
New
Where were
Jersey.
you at?
I was in New Jersey, Edison, New Jersey. I moved there when I was 13, and so that was 8th grade. And Edison is really, really interesting because even though it got awarded as the top biggest little city a couple years ago. So it's a small town, but it's also really big, and it's a donut, which is really weird because
Can you eat it?
It's
Can
hard.
you believe it?
But the downtown, it's like where the downtown would be, it's just another town. It's kind of like a separate town. And so you have North Edison, and then which is like a half moon, and then South Edison, and then Metuchen in the middle with its like cafes and things.
So you could touch it in the middle?
I guess.
But
I'm in South Edison, so it's like the smiley at the bottom. North Edison is they're a little bit more stuck up, and that's why I'm saying they're the frown.
It's funny that you're making all these hand gestures while recording audio.
I know.
Nobody can see these things.
But it makes it easier to talk.
No, it's great to talk about. It's interesting to talk about a hometown in those kinds of ways because you've experienced it spatially, so you want to have people understand it spatially too, right? But okay, so then.
But wait, let me tell you something about Edison, New Jersey, because I feel like people are always hating on New Jersey.
Oh man!
And they don't really know. It's like a really rich kind of culture, at least in Edison, and I think other parts. But Edison had the school I went to was the highest level of diversity in the state.
Okay.
So I was coming from Colombia, where I basically only knew Colombians, and all of a sudden I'm in classes with like people from Africa and India and Pakistanis, and I had to learn like, you know, what the difference between an Indian and a Pakistani was, and all sorts of like different people from Asia, and then also from Latin America, a bunch of different people. And then you had really recent immigrants, and then people who had been there for generations. And that's also like a really interesting
dynamic.
Yeah, that happens there. And so Edison was just an amazing place for us to end up as far as that we got exposed to all of these amazing cultures and diversity that really quickly, that I think is, you know, that sometimes people imagine only in big American cities, but I think there are a lot of kind of smaller towns that have a lot of that. And so that was an amazing thing about Edison. And then from there I went to Williams College, which Williamstown was very different than Edison in that respect.
I imagine.
It was,
but it's still pretty diverse, though.
well, the colleges.
Yeah. But the college makes up the majority of the place, no?
Yeah, but I think there's also like, there is kind of, I don't know, I think there's also that tension. There's a lot of tension in that area between the things that the college brings and then the people who are locals.
Yeah, the local yokels.
Yeah.
The townies.
Well, because also like in that area, it used to be a really big industrial area. Yeah. And so after that, there's kind of like all these empty buildings. A
vacuum of
space.
Space.
And there's, I think, a lot of the local people. Now they also have kind of, I think, one of the highest teen pregnancies in the country in that area. And I think there's like a lot of lack of jobs and things in that area. So I think that then in stark contrast with all the kind of privilege that is at the college,
Yeah.
it has that tension too.
Yeah.
And I think you have kind of a mixture of people at the college too, who have been people who are like really old money, who have been maybe had their families forever going to Williams,
Yeah.
and then there's people who are like international students, and then there's people who are from the U.S., but maybe they're the first ones going to college in their
Yeah.
family. And so there's that diversity in that way, but there's which also has like its tensions, I think.
Yeah. And what were all these different tensions and these different places that you've lived and gone to school? How did all these tensions kind of build a context for you to make art?
Yeah, I think, and actually, you were asking me about Ondine before, and the Latino Studies department in general at Williams, I think, was really well. First, the history of the Latino Studies department is one of my favorite things, because something like 10 years ago, actually they're going to be celebrating 10 years in this coming year, but students who, like, there was kind of a push to start kind of making Williams more diverse overall, and so you were having all of these students and all of a sudden but there was no type of like context for them, and there was the tensions that we're talking about hadn't really been negotiated, and I think that I feel like there was actually a lot of people who were coming from places like California, where the Chicano movement it just has a presence that is kind of understood even without like you explaining. It's just in the air almost. And when people got to Williams and there was kind of that lack, then students had a hunger strike. Because also there was, even though there were a lot more students of color coming in, there was a really low retention rate. Even though the retention rate for Williams in general is really high, a lot of the students who were coming who were Latino or Black just like were not graduating. And so the students kind of had a hunger strike, and it was a 10-day hunger strike. And out of that, they kind of demanded the formation of a Latino Studies program at Williams. And I think that has always kind of that really activist start of that program, and the way that the faculty that are there kind of know that they're there because of the students and what the students were willing to do has remained really present in that program. And
so the urgency for it to come into place hasn't been lost. There's still a sense of urgency.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that there's kind of a sense of that the faculty really respect the students in that way, because there's kind of that history of them also being there because of what the students were willing to do.
Yeah, that's the same way that the Chicano Studies program was started at UCLA in 1993. The students had a hunger strike. Yeah, so there's like a real sense of urgency and what the students are willing to put up or risk for those programs. So that's interesting. So that's kind of stayed with you, that sense of urgency and that sense of political kind of action.
Well, and I think that the thing that was really amazing about that program is that it gave me a way to think of the experiences I was having and from like my migration and what I was trying to negotiate to the new tensions I was feeling all of a sudden being immersed in this privilege and trying to figure out like what my privilege was, like coming from kind of like an upper middle class in Colombia, but now mixed with where I was now in the United States and the people I was meeting, and kind of locate that within a larger context.
Yeah, but my question to you would be regarding that situation was there a sense that you belonged or didn't belong?
At Williams?
Yeah.
I guess there's kind of both. And because I think I worked really hard to try and find, or to like really create spaces where I felt like I belonged. Like when we started Ritmo Latino, the Latin dance group, and that was a space that I really felt like I belonged. But there were always times when just the way that I really also felt policed. Just if you laugh too loud, if you like, just like all these crazy, like I started.
If you started saying, "Can you believe it?
Can you believe it?" Unbelievable. It's just a different way that people are, and just like a different
just
way.
Cultural things.
Yeah, and that like.
Cultural norms.
Yeah.
If you were kind of outside the box of cultural norms, you feel like you'd get second glance.
Yeah.
I remember my first couple of times to New York, like I'm loud and I laugh crazy, and I would get shushed in restaurants, and I was like, "What the hell? Somebody actually shushed me?" So
exactly.
There are like details like that you felt that you had to be conscious of.
Well, yeah, and I think that because it happened like incrementally, I didn't really realize how much I had become like self-conscious about the way I naturally act until right after college, I got a fellowship from Williams that was supposed to like allow me to just whatever I needed to do to make work. And I decided I wanted to go back to Colombia. We had just gotten our green card, and I hadn't been back to Colombia in about 9-10 years, and I wanted to go back and spend some time. And I spent a lot of time in this tiny little island in the Caribbean, and all of a sudden all the things that I was used to like getting just like dirty looks for or whatever, like people loved. Wow. And that's what like people used, just like they just loved it. And they loved that I was really loud, and that it's like, because they were twice as loud as I was, you know? They're like...
Can you believe it?
I know! And like, I'm always coming up with weird nicknames for everybody, and people like sometimes in college just like, "Oh, that is so rude." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like the nice thing.
Well, and that's like a very like typical Latino thing to do, is make up nicknames because everybody's named the same. I'm like, okay, right here we're sitting with our friends Tony and Beto and Mario and Silvia. Like, how many of those, if we were to go to a plaza somewhere in Latin America or even here in LA and be like Mario, would be like,
or even within your family, right? There's like a ton of them.
Be like Mario, 20 people will turn around.
Right.
But if I call you like Pulpo, like only 1 or 2 people will call you, turn around.
Well,
right?
so my nickname in the island was Hurricane Eyebrows. Right? So I'm riding there on my motorcycle, because that's like the only way to transport yourself there. I had to learn how to ride, right? And then I'm riding there on the one road around the island.
Was it Spanish or in English? No.
It's mixed.
Oh.
Because this island actually, was settled by Dutch pirates, and then also a lot of like slaves from other Caribbean islands escaped there.
Oh, okay.
And so it's got a really crazy history. So it's like the first truly bilingual place I've ever lived too. That was one of the amazing things. But so I'd be like riding past.
So they would call you Hurricane Eyebrows.
Oh yeah, that's like the shortened version of it, right? No.
Okay.
It was like this. You would be riding, and from the street, like you'd hear out of somebody's window, "Hurricane Eyebrows!" And then sometimes if you were hanging out, like, or if there was somebody else, as they finished the eyebrows, somebody would say, "Hurricane Soul!" So that was the whole nickname, Hurricane Eyebrows, Hurricane Soul.
Jeez, man, that sounds like a wrestler name. That's like a tag team wrestling group.
But that's like all the things that like, and I felt like that epitomized so much.
Okay, so language and the kind of play of language and these kind of interchangeable things within language, within Spanish and English, like a kind of Spanglish or a kind of translations of things, really has become like a topic with some of your work, right?
Yeah.
So you leave Williams, a couple of years later, I see you in Medellin again, and then you tell me you're coming to school here in Los Angeles at Otis to get your master's degree in their social practice program. Mm-hmm. You start there, and then almost instantaneously, along with your starting here, your conversations with me started to pick up about this idea of translations and kind of wordplay and all these things. And your work throughout your graduate school career were about these types of issues. How did those things start formulating into artworks or projects for you? And what were those types of projects that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been really interested in storytelling, and so for me it was I think always trying to find ways to kind of bring those stories into other forms and translate them into ways, or develop mechanisms that would facilitate kind of story collection and engagement. And so I think at first it was a little bit about just the stories I had from my networks, finding ways to share those with other people. And little by little it started to feel like I wanted to find ways to get stories from people that I wouldn't like seek out specifically as individuals, but rather as maybe based on place. And so that's kind of like how there was a transition from resharing the stories of my families and friends to wanting to know what other stories were out there. And I developed the Bike BQ.
Bike BQ.
The Bike BQ.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about Bike BQ.
So Bike BQ is part of Talk is Cheap, which is kind of the general project Talk is Cheap. And Bike BQ is a kind of crazy customized bike I have with a kind of little grill on the back, where I set up shop and cook Colombian arepas, which are kind of corn patties that you grill in butter and exchange them for stories about miscommunication. And usually I've been in LA. I was working with the William Grant Still Art Center in my neighborhood, and just setting out. And they're really kind of an amazing place. I think they really, I'm increasingly interested in places that kind of are at the intersection of like a cultural space and a civic space. And I think that's one of the great things about the William Grant Still Art Center, that they see themselves more than an art space as a place for developing, for like addressing and developing the needs of the community. Which I feel like a lot
of models of in Medellin.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also part of what you guys do here. And so I would set up shop there sometimes during like the classes they have for the kids, and so I would interact a lot with them and their parents. But then also on the third Saturday of the month, in conjunction with the church across the street, they have food distribution. So people actually come from all over to like get food, and then in the meantime they hang out. And so while they hang out, because it's this very drawn out process, then I would cook up and we'd talk and we'd be hanging out. And so that was kind of what I did in LA. And then after that, I decided I wanted to take the bike up to Portland for the Open Engagement Conference.
So just to be clear, you were setting up your Bike BQ, making arepas on the back on a cooking grill, and then but you were the point of exchange was that you would give people arepas, and in exchange for the food, they would give you a story about some type of miscommunication or mistranslation that they've had in their life. Yeah. So if I give you one now, will you give me an arepa?
Well, I don't have it.
Well, can I get credit for one?
You can get credit for one.
Okay, well, I had this really funny story happen to me.
Okay.
Well, like a few years ago, I like to go to the flea market every Sunday morning. And Carla and I went to one in Orange County. And before that, I wanted to go into the donut shop to get a cheese-filled, ham and cheese-filled croissant. I think I told you the story, but I'll tell you again for the record. And so I go into the place, right? And they're, I think, a Vietnamese family working the donut shop. The grandma, the mom, the teenage sons, college sons, everybody's back there. So I walk into the place and I'm like, can I get a ham and cheese croissant? And the lady's like, ham and egg. And I'm like, ham and cheese. And she's like, ham and egg. And I'm like, ham and cheese. Ham and egg, ham and cheese. So I'm like, if you don't have ham and cheese, okay, I'll take a ham and egg. And I'm like, ham and cheese. She's like, ham and egg. And then Carla pokes me from behind and she tells me, she's asking you how many, you pendejo. And I was like, how many? I was thinking she was telling me she wanted a ham and egg. And I keep telling her I want a ham and cheese. I'm like, ham and egg, ham and cheese, ham and egg, ham and cheese. So to make a long story short, I felt really embarrassed because I thought the lady was telling me ham and egg, and I was asking for ham and cheese. And back and forth a couple of times, and all the sons and the tío and everybody was mad dogging me from behind, like, Why are you messing with our abuela? But, is that a mistranslation?
Yeah, I think that works.
All right, cool.
That's awesome.
Does I get credit for it?
Yes.
All right, cool. Awesome. So you did that at the William S. Grant Center here, and then you took it on the road a little bit.
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
So at first I was kind of planning on stopping on bigger cities along the way, but then just through the people I know and everything, people started telling me I should go to, like, they invited me to go to where they were living in smaller rural towns, and then I thought that it would be really, really interesting to just see the difference, and it was amazing. I stopped in Merced, California, and then in Woodland, and then the last stop, Eugene, is bigger. It's a college town in Eugene, Oregon, and then Portland. But I think especially the two kind of really more rural California towns were just such an amazing experience. It was interesting to see like where the experiences overlap with things that go on in the city, and like what tensions are being kind of negotiated in those towns similarly than in LA, and then what things are just like really, really different, but both of those towns are kind of agricultural towns, and they have canneries, and so those have a really strong presence. But in Merced, we set up, actually, I was really worried because when we showed up in kind of the middle of the day, it kind of reminded me of Williamstown, actually, in that there's only like one main road.
Yeah. My best description of Williamstown is like if you've ever seen like a little train set, Christmas train set thing at the mall or whatever, and the display of a little train in a little town with like a church and a little store and a dog and a little nativity scene, and that's Williamstown. It's like a little blip.
Yeah.
Right?
And okay. Merced was kind of like the Western version of that.
Okay. So you had tumbleweeds of it and
kind
instead
of, yes. And it was really funny because I was looking, I had a friend who had come out, actually somebody who I went to Williams with and who actually went to the island with me. And so we've been friends for a while, and we've collaborated on videos before, and I had him come over to help me shoot along the road, and we were importing the footage from Merced and Woodland, and I'm like, what's wrong with the camera? It's really shaky. And he goes, no, that's just the heat waves behind you. Oh, that's how hot it was that you can see it in the video, right?
Wow. It wasn't your aura, your chakras?
I mean...
your chakras weren't aligned and you're omitting energy?
That's what, and I posted like kind of... those video stills, and in all of them I look really angry, right? And it's just like there was so much sun that in all these pictures I look like I'm like glaring, but it's just like
that's why we wear sunglasses over here.
I know. So, but so then Merced, we show up in Merced, and it's like the middle of the day, and it's deserted, and I'm like, oh my God, this is gonna fail. Nobody's gonna come out.
Zombie town?
There was nobody. And the people who are hosting us, they're really nice. They're giving us kind of a tour and explaining what different areas are and what the dynamics are and demographics of the town. And then they're like, no, don't worry, we just have to come out later. People come out at night. I'm like, it's a Monday night. Who's gonna be coming out at night, right? Turns out that the bar, right, had an open mic night that night. And so we popped into the bar and we asked if we could set up right in front, if they would mind. They were really happy to have us there. Everybody's really excited in little towns when you want to do anything. That was like,
yeah, because there's nothing
else
to
do. It was amazing after like trying to, like in LA I feel like you have to like negotiate everything, and they're like, yes, come please.
They're like, please, I'm sick of seeing Bill everybody.
And so we set up front of the bar, and I was still dubious that anybody was gonna come But then all of these people come out. Like the whole street started getting filled at night. Like once it was cool enough for people to go out.
And the people do things early in the morning and then later in the afternoon and the evening, right?
Yeah.
The sun is not so hot. Oh, makes sense.
And so it was amazing because like in LA we'd set up by the William Grant Stiller Center, and there was like lots of kids and kind of it was different, you know. And then during the days when the food distribution was, there was a lot of like kind of señoras who would come, but this was like all of these like random conglomeration of people who came out for the open mic night in front of it. And then people were just there to drink. There were a lot of people who worked in the fields and the canneries who just were there to get a drink at night. And then like there was a pool place right next to it, and like all of a sudden this enormous bouncer comes up to me, and he's like looking at us, he's like, "They told me if I tell you a story, I can get one of those food things." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Great." And then he just like, this enormous guy, all of a sudden who was like a bouncer, is like trying to come up with a story about miscommunication and like giggling really deeply. And it was just kind of amazing, you know? And so, and then he's like walking away back to his doorstep with like his arepa and just like sitting there really happy. But he was like, this guy had to be like 6'9". He was huge.
So maybe you should have got two.
I know. Well, he only told me one story. But it was amazing. It was just such a different dynamic, and it was great.
What was this? What was the story? What did he tell you?
Well, so he was telling me, and so the reason I have it be about miscommunication as opposed to just mistranslation, which is kind of where the project started for me, and dealing with migration, is that I think it provides a way for other people who maybe are not like immigrants or are not thinking about that in that way to also participate. Mm-hmm. And especially in larger groups, when people start participating and sharing stories, other people gather, and it becomes almost like a conversation across other people.
Oh, okay.
And so but so then I've also gotten like a really wide range of stories. Like some are really directly linked to where the start of the project was for me, about kind of migration and language and assimilation, and what are the pressures that people feel to like not speak Spanish to their kids or things like that. But then there are just like also like at William Grant Stiller Center, I got a ton about like miscommunication between parents and kids. And like so the kids would come and tell me how like their parents just like didn't understand, like how they thought they were always giving them attitude, and sometimes they're just talking and that's the way they talk. And the parents, then like that kid's parent would come and tell me, and he's like, she just never listens to me. But it was really interesting because like both of them, like at the end,
both sides of the story.
Yeah, but they're both like wanting the same thing. They both just wanted each other to respect each other, you know. And so it was really interesting like that. But then in Merced, I got also a bunch of workplace accident stories and miscommunications with that. And then but then there's like moments when it gets like really intense, and I don't know if people like feel like if maybe this is just such a part of people's lives that it doesn't seem like a big deal to them, or if maybe talking to a stranger allows you to share things in a way that maybe like you wouldn't if like you knew it was gonna get back to like your sister or whatever.
Maybe less judgment on
it. But then like in Merced also, this guy like showed up and told me about how his story was that his daughter had been like shot, and because of that then she had been taken away by like child protective services. And so I'm like listening to his story, and I'm asking, and then I'm like, so what was the miscommunication there? And his miscommunication was that he had told her she shouldn't be at a certain place at a certain time, and like she hadn't understood that he really meant she shouldn't be there. And so it's like, you know, I'm getting this story about like this guy's daughter being shot and like being in the hospital now, and like he having no like access to her, and like, but he's just like telling it to you like really kind of commonplace. And so I don't know, there was like a lot of stories like that along the way sometimes you hear, and or in Woodland, there was a couple. So in Woodland, I set up in front of Taller de Arte Nuevo Amanecer, which is a space that Malaquias Montoya, who is a printmaker and Chicano artist, he set up this printmaking studio where they teach youth from the area like classes for free on printmaking, and a good amount of the kids' parents work in the fields, and so like one of the mothers came by and like she was telling me like stories about the stuff that goes on in the fields and what it's like, and that was just like really intense too. So but then there's moments that are really awesome too, like at William Grant Still Art Center this woman had been telling me about how when she first got here she didn't have time to learn English because she had to get straight like to work to like start her family or whatever, and so her kids kind of spoke Spanish a little bit in English, but like her grandkids now don't speak any Spanish, and so they can't really communicate at all. And so, and as she's telling me this black lady who's like super loud comes in and she hears us speaking Spanish and she starts like throwing in random Spanish. And then like her story was about how she had all these Latina friends, right? And she always felt like she was missing out when they were sharing things in Spanish. Like even when they told her what they were talking about, it felt like she was missing out. Like it wasn't funny when they told her why they were laughing, you know? and so she like decided she wanted to learn Spanish, also because apparently she has a jewelry business and it's hard to haggle with people in a different language if you don't have their language. And so like these ladies like talking about this, and then out of nowhere this other woman who had been talking about like her grandkids not speaking Spanish asks her like how she learned Spanish, and they start trading tips on how you can like what helps you learn Spanish and how you can get people to learn Spanish. And so that opens to me, up a dialogue. Yeah, that to me was amazing, because especially I was really worried that in that neighborhood there is kind of like traditionally an African American neighborhood and has that history, and in the last maybe 10-15 years there's been a lot of Latino immigrants, and sometimes there's a lot of tension around that. And so when I was starting the project I was like, oh, I feel like there's gonna be some stuff that is gonna be like tense here. But then it ends up like surprising you that actually that like interaction is what led this lady to all of a sudden get tips on how to teach her kids.
There was a funny instance I saw. I kind of witnessed that firsthand in the relationship between like African Americans and Latinos, Mexicans and Latinos here in Los Angeles. Is that one time I was at a Church's Chicken on Imperial and I think Western over here in South LA, and so I went in there and I bought my 2-piece Tuesday and give you like a thigh and a leg for $2 and a piece of pan, and I'm like there eating, and I seen these 2 young black girls come in and they start ordering their food, and they order the special, but they ask for like particular things, right? And the girl at the thing, she didn't know how to plug it into the cash box, so she turned around and asked the manager, another Latina lady, in Spanish like something, and the black girl got mad. She's like, oh, what are you talking about in Spanish? You should be talking in English. You're talking in Spanish, I don't, you're talking about me or something. You should speak English. So then that was like, so I'm like, wow, that's an instance. Like, so after they finish the transaction, they get their food and leave, and after that an elderly kind of African American man comes in, the same deal. Something he orders, she says something in Spanish. Hey, you should speak in English. We're here in the United States. So I was like, oh wow, there's a trip how that tension with language happens. Yeah. Mostly it's because, there's a sense of loss and of space and community, because their whole core value system around the identity in terms of space has shifted, right? For a lot of the African Americans, because South Central and those areas, since they are traditionally black, that was their sense of identity and place. So now it's kind of shifting, so they hold on to that. So anyway, the third person to come in, and this sounds like a bad joke, but it was a Chinese man. So I was like, oh man, what's going to happen now? I'm like, if the 2 first African Americans are having this problem with this girl, she speaks Spanish to the thing, what's going to happen now? So I'm like waiting, I have my chicken wing, I'm like ready to listen, right? And the Chinese guy comes in and he walks up to the counter and he goes, "Me das dos pollos?" And I was like, damn! Well, I was like just thinking like that was like another an attitude of the immigrant is adaptability to the place.
Yeah.
So instead of coming and just thinking, oh, I got to learn English to adapt to this place, the Chinese guy, and you see it in any instance in any liquor store with the Koreans or different people that own stores, they learn how to speak Spanish too besides English. So it's like they come in especially to an area like Southern California where Spanish is pretty dominant, and they have to learn Spanish, but then they're also having to learn English. Some of them just learn Spanish. One time I was in Chinatown and this Chinese man came and he was from China, and he goes, oh no, pero he started speaking to me in Spanish. He said that he had immigrated from China to I think Uruguay, and then from Uruguay here, so there was
wow.
So his route was really different from other places. Okay, so the bike BQ, that's an interesting way to gather stories. And now you're finished with your master's degree here, and you're gearing up for some new exciting things. You're going to be moving back across the country. You're engaged. You have a fiance now. So tell us a little bit about your plans for the next year. I know you're going to be doing things, all kinds of stuff.
So I guess I'm going to be starting to... The Queens Museum offered me a fellowship to work with their public engagement program there, and the work that the Queens Museum is doing is really interesting to me because, like what I was telling you about institutions that see themselves both as cultural and civic spaces, I think they're really working in that way. And in Corona, Queens, it's just a really great variety of immigrants that kind of reminds me of like what Edison is, and so I'm really interested to work with those communities, and I'm gonna be kind of working with different artists that are coming through to projects to help facilitate, and be also working as a link between community members and artists who come. So I'm really excited for that. I think it's gonna be great, and I'm gonna kind of alongside with that continue to develop the project. I want to now listen to all of the stories I've been collecting and kind of figure out a way to translate that into something else, another iteration of it for kind of resharing this process of collection and redistribution. And then I also want to try and figure out ways to connect with New Jersey. I think that because there's so much there's just so many interesting things about it, but there's like such a lack of attention to it, and when I lived there was just nothing that you can point to that is about that place really. The few instances that I had any kind of art or work made about New Jersey were really meaningful to me because they were like so few that I think I'm really interested in working in New Jersey too, and making work about New Jersey a little bit, and then also trying to reconnect with Latin America again. I think that going to Medellin before starting the program was a really amazing experience in that it allowed me to be in my country but separated from like my family context, which was the only context I had for it, and really see what exciting things people are doing in Colombia and Latin America, and I want to kind of get to know Latin America better. Just in general, I feel like there needs to be more cross-pollination in all the Americas, like in like the continent as such. And so I guess in my goal for the next 2 years is going back to Latin America and maybe even Canada and connecting with Latino artists there too, and just starting to build a context for myself there.
Interesting. Well, it's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
Silvia, Juliana, Mantilla, Ortiz. Thanks for sharing all that wonderful information with us, and thank you for being our first artist to do an interview in our new little handy recorder.
Zoom.
All right, so you better believe it with Silvia. Thanks, her. Okay, and we out.